Hello and welcome to what I've called my own personal vendetta against Crim, where I'll be showing you a certain line that I'm often taking with my core decks against Crims, which has brought me a lot of good results in the past with both Palana at Last Worlds and with Sportsmetal at the Continentals and Intercontinental tournaments this year. And shoutouts to Benny Bioken for the best format to present any Netrunner content in, which is in the form of a talk. So I will be presenting a few slides on what the idea is, and then I'll be looking into the replays of the games that I played in Intercontinental tournaments and go into more detail there. So first of all, what are we playing against? So we're playing against typically 4-9 decks in the current standard format. And these 4-9 decks basically have one main threat that they'll be trying to deploy, which is diversion of funds. They will take away some of your money to pressure your economy, to slow you down enough for them to be able to set up their engine and be able to roll you over. And this they will be doing with a combination of typically in the early game boomerang with diversion of funds, and later on, of course, the breakers that they have to get into your servers. Furthermore, they'll be playing turning wheel, which forces central defenses because you can't let them just, for example, if you don't ice HQ and R&D at all, they can just run in there, get single accesses, and later on turn the turning wheel into the multi-axis, which may or may not be a win condition for them. Actually, we had a small debate on this in the Discord lately. But nevertheless, whether we call this win condition or not, this is one thing that they will be trying to convert into a win for them by getting a lot of accesses. Furthermore, what they are then deploying with which stands behind all of these threats is a strong economic engine. So they can use the combination of Rizikis, casts, bravados, and falsifieds, and whatever they have in their arsenal to develop a strong economic engine, which I would also count Amakua as a part of, because being able to break ice by just paying 1 credit per subroutine is also a really strong economic benefit. And if uncontested, like if the corp can't allow or can't find the time to purge, this is a huge advantage that the Crim player has, and which they will use to dominate the late game then. And finally, lately we've been seeing a bit of Blackfile, especially in the matchup against Sports, which can actually decide close games for the Crim player at this point, where they have a Vikerong ticking and just need to not lose for 2 more turns, and they can just install a Blackfile and win that way. So what are the weaknesses in the deck? Because that's what we'll have to look at when we're trying to decide how to combat this. I'd say Crims have pretty predictable play patterns, which means that since they have 45 cards, they will typically do few or that use diversion of funds on you once every 15-ish cards. So this means you know when the diversions will hit you, and besides that, they don't really have anything besides reacting to what you are doing, since their only real win condition is turning wheel, and that's a pretty slow and predictable one as well. So they won't be deploying a conduit on you and then digging for 15 cards. No, they'll just do what they're doing, set up, contest your remote, trash some stuff, contest your HQ, and use diversion. So what they'll do is actually pretty predictable from your side, and that's what you can use. Furthermore, they're really reliant on Amakua and Boomerang for the ultimate game. So if you have tools against this, this can mean that they'll have to actually find the breakers. And making a Crim player actually find and use their real breakers can be really advantageous in this game. And finally, their early interaction is pretty much fully based around diversions. So if you can in some way stop the diversion hitting you early, that means that they can't slow you down and won't have the time to actually set up what they're trying to do. So I'd say looking at this part is really important. And with that, let's look at what my Palana list was looking like back at Worlds 2020. In this case, it was the time where we are playing Obokata protocols and first learned that Cyberdeck Sandbox was actually a good card. And I'd say what this deck is trying against 4-9 is applying Sandbox, Cyberdex Virus Suit as Archives Poison, and then maybe playing around the one Macrophage that you have in your deck. So what you can do as a Palana player here is try to go fast, obviously. This deck was a very rush-based deck, but also try to do it in a way that doesn't leave openings in the early game. So for example, if this was your mulligan, so your 5 cards plus your 1 mana tree draw, what I would do here back then was typically install the border control in HQ, install Rashida Bay and Thimblerig, and then have all options that I need. So best case, they draw a card, which means you can even res both of your eyes, but even if they don't draw a card at this point, we have the option. If they have the nuts in hand, like if they have mulled into a boomerang plus a diversion, and they install the boomerang on your HQ eyes and then play the diversion, they've spent 3 clicks and 3 credits to get to this point. You then, for 4 credits, res your border control, make them break it with boomerang, and trash the border control to end the run. This means they lost access to one of the boomerangs. They have not gotten any money off of you, which means that they now are on 2 credits. You may be on 1, but you've stopped the entire early game plan. And if they then should run the Rashida, you can still let them trash it, and then they are broke, you're broke as well, but you will be able to set up much more quickly because their entire idea was to get you down on money while themselves having money. And getting to a state in the turn 1 where both players are poor is really good for Palana, because Palana's ID is a money positive ID. So since 4-9 player will probably have to draw some cards, you will slowly drip some money and use whatever else you have in your deck to get an advantage. So for example, if you draw into a celebrity gift, you can use that to get back in money. Your ice is really cheap to res, so slot machines, Engram flushes, vanillas, those were kinds of ice that you were resing to from low credit totals, which still had a huge impact on the game. And then at some point you will get off another Rashida or an NGO front if they trashed your first Rashida and gain the advantage that way. So this was like the one idea. Use border control on HQ, and even if your HQ then is open, they typically won't have the time to run in again and find more agendas. If they do, that's also fine. But like in this case, even if they, with their 4th click, run into HQ again and find your Nisei, you still have fired a Rashida. So this is still a positive exchange for you. The Obokata in hand is pretty safe because taking 4 net damage in the early game is also pretty devastating. And this means your game is going on while they are stuck in their tracks and need to find a way to actually set up and get into the game again. Yeah, so I'd say this is what Palana was able to do. Border controls in HQ were a big part, and otherwise you were just installing like your small but nasty eyes like Engram Flush, like slot machines on HQ, and then just make them get past it or like if you were able to call Engram Flush on event and hit more diversions out of their hand, that was perfect. But in any case, slightly icing HQ and using border controls in the correct times was the way to go. So much for Palana. I unfortunately don't have any replays of those games because replays weren't invented back then, and I think I never was on stream with the Palana against Crim game, so I can't show more at this point. But what I can show is more information about the Sportsmetal matchup. And the Sportsmetal deck that I brought to Intercontinentals is listed here on the left. During Continentals, I had a slightly different ice composition and had less Hagens, and I will come to that point later on why Hagen is actually important as Sportsmetal in this matchup. But let's say you drew into this kind of starting hand. You have 2 ice and you have other stuff. In this case, you even have a hedge fund, so this is kind of the perfect start against Criminal if you have ice. If you have ice, you can use both of them on HQ. You will later on find enough other eyes to be able to do the rest of your game plan. But if you're able to find 2 eyes, icing, putting both in HQ, maybe even showing one of them if you want to keep that economic advantage, and playing the hedge fund is an amazing start, because this means even if they have the best draw that they can have in a boomerang into a diversion, they can't land the diversion on the first turn, and this gives you enough breathing room to do whatever else you want to do. So this is what would be the main idea if you're playing these kinds of sports metal decks against criminal. But the problem is the chance of you having 2 eyes after drawing 6 cards is 40%. So that means there'll at least be as many games in which you don't have 2 eyes, and the question is, what do you do there? So how can you get forward when you only have 1 eyes or even 0 eyes? And that will be the second approach. If you don't have that much ice, the ice on HQ actually becomes a kind of different sort of game. You still ice HQ. So what I would do in this kind of hand would be to play Hedge Fund, play the vanilla on HQ, and then install the Hyperloop to just start with your Sports Metal game plan and get some positive tempo for you. And in these cases, typically diversions still happen. Like if they have a boomerang, or if they early on find a paperclip, that won't stop them. So diversions will happen, and that's something that you should just consider. So in this case, we have 9 credits. Giving away 4 of them is still fine, because we can still score a Hyperloop. We can even use red level. We could do stuff with Biotic if we really need to, and the Audacity is cost 0. So losing 5 credits in the early game doesn't really hurt us, and obviously they then have 5 more credits to work with, but they need tools to interact with you. And those tools are breakers, which I only have 3 of in their entire deck, plus Armakuras. And that typically means that they will be drawing a lot to find their stuff while you get ahead in your board. Maybe find a Tranquility Home Grid, maybe score some agendas, maybe even put some ice on the remote, put a Vitruvius in there, and just let them come at you. If you have 2 eyes on the remote, they would really need to find a boomerang plus inside job, or boomerang plus the correct breakers to be able to get in there, so you can actually play a remote game against 419. So this brings me to the point, like, how could we differently look on diversion of funds? And I kind of feel like this entire game plan starts falling short when people actually build around this fact, but the way that 419 decks are currently built, I feel is so linear that this kind of approach works. So let's look on diversion of funds and ask ourselves, what if we couldn't ice HQ? And there will be one game where I never res any HQ ice, and that still worked. So what would be if for some reason the rules just told us, no, you can't ice HQ? That would mean during the course of a game, 15 credits will go to the runner. So what? Like, if we have enough economy to be able to give away 15 credits and still win, this card wouldn't make any much difference besides being more or less a sure gamble for the runner that costs maybe even two clicks. So because what they will have to do is they will have to use breakers to get to your cheap ice. That means you don't lose much tempo by raising the cheap ice, but they have to lose a lot of tempo to find the breakers, have some copies of Mutual Failure probably in the deck, call the correct breakers, not run into any drafters, not run into any gatekeepers, which all give you really much of positive tempo. And as long as you can do that, you don't have any problems. So the only thing you also need to have a plan against Amakua, and there will be one game where I played again in the Intercontinentals where I actually used a purging plan in Sports Metal, and that also worked out. So just pressure them into finding breakers, and you'll typically be fine. That would be the line that I'm taking a lot. I know that also in NWE we had a lot of these discussions, and people were telling me that they would definitely play differently, and they are playing differently against Crim, but at least for me this is something that worked out fine. So maybe this can be food for some thought of your own, and maybe a different perspective on the game for you. So with that, let's look into some actual games that were played. And the first game will be the game against Django that I had in Intercontinentals. And what happened in this game? Let me see. Okay, I can move through a game like this. What happened in this game was that my starting hand had one piece of ice, so this Hagen, but the rest of it was kind of wonky. So if I tried to put the Rashida into play, I would probably need to ice it with Hagen, and then my HQ stands open. And if they have a diversion in hands, which I now can see they don't, but obviously I didn't know during the game, that would be devastating for me. So losing Rashida and losing the 5 credits would be stopping me dead in my tracks. So I mulliganed this hand and got a hand without any ice. And this is actually even still better than the hand that we had before, because now we have hedge fund. This means like even if they have a diversion, even if they doof us down to 4 credits, we still have some money to work with. So after the mandatory draw and after trying to find something with sprint, the only things I found was one more copy of hedge fund, and I thought it was fine. So what I did was to just play the 2 hedge funds and see where I'm going. So I'm at 13 credits. Even if they have 2 diversions, I'm still not dead at this point. So not icing HQ is actually something that I can afford. They did a bit of build up, found the diversion, found the penny shaver, took away 5 of my credits. But still, I have 8 credits to work with, which is more than enough to do what I want to do. So my mandatory draw draws me to Rashida. Since Luminal is a really, really strong agenda, I can even afford to just use it at this point. With a Biotic, I just score it, get 3 more clicks to do stuff with, and I find some ice. So now I can actually ice my HQ. Don't get me wrong, I'm saying a lot about why HQ defenses are not as important, but making them work for the diversions a bit is really helpful, because leaving HQ completely open also means that you are open to all kinds of single access. And at this point, you'll probably lose your Rashida from HQ, and they'll have really easy access to turning wheel and so on. So having some ice on HQ is still good. But in this case, you'll see this ice becomes irrelevant pretty soon. So what Django starts doing is finding a turning wheel and using turning wheel on HQ. Obviously, with 2 credits, I can't res at this point. So they just do their stuff. Run again. Luckily, no, actually they did find the Rashida, so they trashed that. So this looks sort of dire for me, but then again, this turning wheel is a really slow card, and against Sportsmetal, multi-accesses means that you also gain some kind of tempo back. So if they find 2 of your agendas, this means 4 credits or 4 cards for you, however you'd like it. So it's actually not that as bad as it looks. Also, a lot of players use the turning wheel on HQ and that typically, from the seat of a Sportsmetal player, is where you want them to go with the turning wheel, because that's where you have control over. You know what cards there are there, and you can manipulate your hand in a way that makes the tokens on HQ worth really little. So I'd personally, but I'm not a good Crim player, I'd personally say that those tokens are better spent on R&D actually. So in any case, I draw into some play because I'm at 2 credits and I know I need to find something. So red level at this point would be probably really great. I guess the Tranquility Homebrew would be the second best card that I can find, because I can now install this in the server. And since there is no Amakua out there, I can just expose all of this. You can let the runner know about a lot of things. Like, you should try to keep the HQ ice secret if you have some, but anything else is pretty much okay to expose, because if they can't get in, if they, for example, in this case, don't know what your server 2 ice is, you can get away with them knowing what's in there. So in this case, I can even res this gatekeeper here, but I don't think I would, just to protect the Tranquility Home Grid. So there, drawing a bunch, looking at R&D, actually finding a Vitruvius, which draws me into some of my cards. Run again, find the Rashida, trash that. So at this point we don't have access to, or at least we have lost 2 of our Rashidas. But since we have Tranquility Home Grid on the remote now, we can start doing stuff. So Tranquility Home Grid just gives us money, and since we drew into a hedge fund, we just take a credit and play the hedge fund, and now we are once again safe against diversion. And as you can see in runner hand, the combination of boomerang into diversion is already sitting there in hand. So afterwards we still have 4 credits. With 4 credits you can do a lot from out of Sportsmetal. So I would expect, yeah, they're just using that combination of cards. And in this case, we have this Hagen. We could technically res it, but that would put us at 0 after the diversion takes away 5 of our credits. And this is not something we want. So at this point, I had to decide whether I want to res this Hagen at all or just leave it around. And what I went for, and what I at that point also knew that the people spectating in NWE were like despairing about, was that I just decided not to res this Hagen at all. I can afford to give away those HQ accesses, but I had the feeling that since 419 only drew 10 of their cards, there's still a lot of drawing that they need to do and a lot of tempo that just needs to go into finding breakers. Also maybe finding a bit of economy because this Penny Shaver alone may not actually be enough. And I knew I could just afford it because I was already on 2 points. 1 more point in the remote that is probably safe at this point. And I'm not that far away. I got my fast advanced tools. I just need some more money and then I can just win this game. So I'm letting him through. I'm losing the 5 credits. He's making a run on R&D, even stealing another Vitruvius, which at this point is good for me because this means I'm gaining forward tempo. I'm taking the money here because, as I've said, I have to, since 2 diversions already happened, I have to calculate with the third one. It's 1 in 35 cards, but 409 is also able to, with stuff like Class Act, find the third diversion rather sooner than later. So I'd expect the third diversion to hit in the next, I'd say, 4 to 5 turns. And if I have enough money to still be able to win from that point on, I don't really care. So taking the money here, I guess scoring the agenda? No. Actually, Owen scoring the agenda because I found Rashida. Since with the Rashida, I can also gain some money with Tranquility Home Grid. This is actually more positive than scoring the Hyperloop, which just gives me 1 point. I think it's kind of a risky play, but in this situation, I expected my eyes here to hold and went for the more tempo positive line of just finding the stuff that I need. And at this point, once again, exposing the Rashida, just because that information doesn't really matter much. Yeah, and I'm even resing it just to go under any kind of falsified that might give the runner some more economy. So runner is drawing cards just to find their other breakers. They hold the paperclip in hand, and also doing a good job of not discarding it because I'm also holding the Arc Lockdown in hand. But yeah, generally just looking for the breakers and gaining some value off of the open HQ. But as I know, I'm not holding any agendas in hand. I don't care much about giving away single accesses from HQ. So this Rashida draws me into some play, and I'd expect me to score the Vitruvius here. Yeah. And once again, Tranquility Home Grid does so much for you because every single of these installs gains you 2 credits, which is exactly that money that you need to be able to withstand those diversions. So runner once again using the open HQ, even find the Vage on here, but this means we're at turn 6. I have still 4 more turns to go and I'm at 4 points, which is probably enough time for me to find the missing 3 points. Runner even finding the book halter here. This means my drafters are disabled, but since I right now don't have any drafters on the table, I'm still fine. And Gatekeeper at the first time is also really expensive for them to break, so I'm still thinking of my bot set here as pretty good, and me being pretty stable at this point. Once again here, Django is deciding to use the turning wheel tokens to see what's in my hand. I personally think this is a losing line, and using those tokens on R&D is better, but once again, this is something that people have different opinions on. And but in this case, definitely knowing what I am holding in hand, this turning wheel accesses don't give any value at all at this point. Opting to not trash the Tranquility Home Grid, which also means that he'll probably not trash the Tranquility Home Grid in the remote, and that gives me a constant stream of value, be it cards or be it money, to close out the game with. So he's playing the Diesel to dig for the Unity, I guess, which was in his deck list, or for the Amakua to have something against Code Gates as a game plan, but not finding any. And as you can see, this is what 4-9 is struggling with a lot of games. Just finding the stuff that he needs. And he's even discarding the Sure Gambles and the other copy of Turning Wheel because those are not cards that are doing anything in this game. He has access to 11 more credits on this Penny Shaver, so money doesn't really matter. And those diversions didn't really matter. What he needs is the third breaker and a way to close out this game. And since Turning Wheel is only on 2 tokens, this means even if he would find all of his breakers at this point, he'd still have to fight through an R&D, which probably draws me cards, which can also draw me into the agenda. Let's say he, with the first access, finds an agenda. I can just draw 2 more cards and probably find an agenda that way as well. And all of this means that the 4-9 game plan is pretty leaky and can't fully prevent me access to my agendas, be it because I drew them and kept them hidden in HQ, or be it because I drew them through his accesses off of R&D. And therefore, with Audacity and with Biotics as my game plan, I'm still fine at this point, without having raised a single ice. Obviously, as you can see, I'm also not finding what I'm looking for, and at this point, using Sprint to actually find agendas. And I'm even installing on the remote, and I'd even argue that showing this card is good would be possible. I know that back in the game I thought about it and then decided to not expose, pay the 1 because I thought 9 credits are still enough to do everything that I need to. Because I can install a vanilla, that doesn't cost me much. Him not knowing what this ice is also good for me, so he now has 2 ice to worry about that he doesn't know what they are. But I think even showing the Mega Pre he would have been fine. He once again is drawing. Oh no! First he's doing a run with the Deuces Wild, which obviously makes sense to know what he has to expect as the outermost ice here. And at this point, he could run in if he wanted to. So he could install the Paperclip from hand, install the Boomerang on there and run in. But he's lacking. I guess he's lacking a credit to do all of it. So drawing more cards with Deuces, taking a Penny Shaver money, and at this point risking it. So in this case, if this is a Gatekeeper, he's not getting in. And since we know this is a Gatekeeper, that's exactly what's happening. I'm stopping him from getting in this turn, which means I can score this Mega Pre. Having the Gatekeeper here also means that I'm drawing cards, which can draw me into the final agenda that I'm looking for. So all of this together gives me a lot of good chances to close out the game sooner than later. I'm also using this Gatekeeper to shuffle back the Hyperloop that I threw into Archives before. So all in all, Gatekeeper really doing a lot of work here. But imagine that this Bookhalter was the Unity, so that he could break Gatekeeper. At that point, he would have to, like the other scenario, which is good for me, would be that this is a drafter, because having a drafter fire with an archive looking like this on last click would mean that I get to fire Rashida, I get to take something into hand, probably Biotic or a hedge fund, and that's also really, really strong for me. So 4-9 not having access to all of his breakers has to go into some very risky lines to be able to interact with you in those stages of the game where they haven't drawn enough cards to have found all the breakers. At this point, just scoring the Mega Pre as the 5th point and hoping to find the 7th point at some point in the future. So this is why I'm drawing 2 cards here. Funnily enough, I haven't found any agendas at this point, which means that I'm just holding the Audacities in hand and hoping to draw into an agenda at some point in the future. Django continuing to draw cards, finds a Docklands pass to empty out HQ, which, as you can see, is empty because I didn't find any cards. But I'd say this tournament access is actually valuable because I've drawn so many cards that there is a high chance of me having drawn the winning agenda at this point. So clearing out HQ at this stage is really, really valuable. And if I had some agendas in HQ, he would have stolen them, and I would have been forced to find my agenda some other way. But as you can see, he's only finding Audacities and Hagens, so I'm still in the clear. He actually finds a Mega Pre off of R&D, and I'm not finding any agendas off of R&D, so I will still have to dig hard for my agenda, which I'm trying to do with the red level, because even at 1 credit and even at 0 credits, I would be able to score at this point by just installing on the Tranquility home grid and gaining a credit, or gaining the 2 credits of the home grid. But I didn't find any agendas at this point, so I just installed 2 Spin Doctors, and I knew I would be able to draw through most of my deck at this point. So I could make sure that I could win whenever needed. So Django trying to find something off of R&D, bounces off of the Gatekeeper, which he can't break, and the Gatekeeper actually only giving me a Vakeron. But with all of the draw effects that I have in my remotes, I can just force a win at this point. He even finds a Vakeron out of HQ, but since there's nothing else there, there's no chance of me losing, and there I find the Mega Pre and just close out the game. So this is kind of what I was talking about. Making the 419 deck just do all of the things that they want to do, but keeping the value of all of these things low enough for you to have enough out. So I know that he wants to get into HQ, and I'm leaving it open. So he can get into HQ, but I know that all of his options to do stuff in HQ, like Docklands Pass, like Turning Wheel, like Diversion, are not enough to stop me from what I'm trying to do. And using the fact that their draw effects are still, even with the inclusion of diesels, are still kind of too little to draw through the entire stack, and to find the mutual favors and to find all of the breakers, is what you can leverage to get a win in these situations. The next game that I want to look at would be the game against Rotom that I played, which showed another way of dealing with Amakua and with 419, and that would be this game. In this game, I'm once again in a situation where I can't do the double ice of HQ. I think I hold this hand if I'm correct. Let's see. Yeah, I'm keeping this hand. This is my starting hand, and here I'm applying the idea of just putting a vanilla on HQ, because I can stop easy attacks on my HQ, and if they actually have the diversion plus boomerang, that will just be it. But that will also have put them into a spot where they only hold 3 cards and 8 credits in their grip, and still will have to draw into more action later on, because vanilla will still be rest and stop them from having any further HQ accesses. So what I'm installing is just an Hyperloop, because if they steal it, that's good for me. Some more money, some more draw from Sportsmetal, and a Spin Doctor, which also just draws me stuff. And I've even exposed the Spin Doctor because I don't want to pay the 409 tax at this point. I guess you could also argue that not exposing the Spin Doctor is fine, just to duck 1 credit out of diversion, but I think just going for the best case of them not having the diversion at this point is more valuable. They do have a diversion, but they only have a bravado to profit off of it. I'm obviously raising the vanilla just to make them use the boomerang, and raising the Spin Doctor because these Vitruviuses are really important to keep safe, and this way I'm just trying to make them not find it. Sorry for that Discord notification. I've just disabled the audio. Alright, so they trash the Spin Doctor, which is fine with me. But they are not accessing the other card, which I would have loved to see, but you can't have everything that you want. So with red level, I'm using red level to actually yeah, I guess. This is an interesting play. Why did I do this? Alright, because I just want to get the cards out of my hand, because I'm using Audacity. This makes sense. As I've said, keeping this Vitruvius safe is important, and I used red level because it would be gone anyways, and therefore I can install the Rashida clicklessly. This is actually important because, as you can see, Rotom is on 1 credit at this point. So trashing this Rashida has a real cost attached to it, and I'm just using the fact that he's on that low amount of credits and just installing it with red level because it's a reasonable threat from my side at this point. Also, resing the Rashida here is pretty important because, as you can also see, he's holding a falsified in hand. So letting him use that, get up to 5 credits and trash Rashida would be really bad for me. That way he has to click for a credit, play Dirty Laundry, not find anything out of archives, and trash Rashida, and only be at 4 credits, with Amakua only at 1 credit, which is actually where I want 4-9 to be. At a really low credit total, and even with the Amakua on board, I'm still pretty happy with the situation as is. So at this point, I know that my remote is safe in the sense of when they run it, they steal and the remote is gone. So I can start thinking about how to deal with Amakua. And what I'm going for here is paying the 1 for the exposed, just so that he doesn't know where stuff is. And in this case, it's really important because I've got a Hagen on an R&D. And I'm letting him guess about where the Hagen is. So he can't realistically run into any of these central servers because, as we are using open deck lists, he knows that I have 3 copies of Hagen in my list, and the probability is pretty high that one of them is somewhere here, lingering around and trying to trash the Amakua. So his only real option is to either run server 2, which I know is an agenda, so that won't give him any Amakua tokens, and since that's so be gone, no tokens in the future, or just run HQ a bunch, and I know there's only a sprint in there, so he's welcome to run in there, spend the credits just to convert his little credit total into virus tokens for Amakua to be able to run the other central. So in any case, I'm safe at this point. So let's see what he does. Draws a bit and just takes credits. As this server 2 could also be Spin Doctor, using Dirty Laundry on it is a bad idea, because if it's a Spin Doctor, you're spending 2 of your little 4 credits, or I guess you do it at this click, so 2 of your 2 credits to run there, and I could just let the run disappear, deny you those 5 credits, and use a Spin Doctor. So taking credits here is the less risky approach. I'm finding actually a Spin Doctor, so first of all using Sprint, shuffling away the Spin Doctor because I've actually found some more playable ice, and this means if I get this on HQ and am able to res all of it, this Amakua is completely counteracted. And I think, okay, because I know that I will not have enough money to do all of that, I'm delaying this and taking credit, because I know my next turn can then be take credit, play hedge fund, install draft on HQ. So I'm just basing this around the fact that I don't think he'll have time to run HQ a bunch, and I'll still have him on less than 3 tokens on Amakua, so that he can't break the drafter when it gets to it. So he's installing Turning Wheel, using Dirty Laundry probably on HQ, and as I've said, I know that I can give him some access on HQ, but I just want to keep the Amakua below 3 and at best below 2 tokens, so that drafter and magnets and so on can actually have an effect on this game. So he is now checking server 2. It's a Hyperloop that's giving me some money, that's giving me some cards. And now I can actually deploy my idea. Since I now also got money from the Hyperloop, I can directly play the hedge fund and install the Hagen on HQ. This time I want to pay the 1 credit to prevent the expose, because him not knowing what ice is where is really important. And at this point, both R&D and HQ mean that his Amakua will get trashed by the first Hagen subroutine. And since I've got one more install left, and I've already paid the 1 credit to prevent the exposure, I'm installing the drafter here. This is kind of risky because it now has 4 servers where he could try to farm Amakua tokens on, but since he's on 5 credits, he'll probably not be able to run all of them, have tools to break stuff, or have inside jobs and so on. So leaving one more server is not that problematic because he doesn't know any of these 4 eyes. So he's just drawing for solutions, finding a boomerang, and deciding to just fire the bravado for some money on R&D. I raised this Hagen, and I know that this is kind of bad for me because now he knows the position of one Hagen, but still, this prevents any further runs on R&D, and that's pretty important at this point. So raising the Hagen is a better option than just leaving the boomerang on there and not raising it for the rest of the game. So at this point, this is a raise that is really important. Yeah, and he draws some more just to find solutions. I'm finding the gatekeeper that he also had already seen, finding a hedge fund. So at this point, let's go back 1 click. I could think about installing something, but since he's 4/9, that means that that will come with an additional tax. Since Amakua is on the board and at 2 tokens, I don't want to. I need to spend that credit, and so I decide to do that on a later turn. So this means I draw 1 more and play the hedge fund to be able to next turn probably install Tranquility Home Grid, install some ice, and set up that way. Now he's actually also just setting up, which gives me 1 turn of what I've said, just installing stuff, paying the credit to prevent the exposure, and then just installing some ice. In this case, I've installed the Tranquility first because I thought that he will be able to contest this server by some combination, and as you can see, like by Deuce's Wild exposing the correct piece of ice, maybe finding this Hagen and running somewhere else like Archives, because I probably won't install the Hagen on Archives, and in this case that would be true, so that he could get some access on Archives, which doesn't have any Cyberdex virus suit in it yet, and at that point he could maybe find ways into the server. So to not risk this Rashida getting trashed, I've installed the Tranquility Home Grid first, which also means that I can get more value out of this later on by installing Rashida on it and triggering Tranquility Home Grid. So now exactly what I've said happens. He's looking at the ice on HQ, seeing the Hagen, which tells him that that's not a server to run into right now. Yeah, I'm asking him to run there. He's running Archives in this case correctly because there is no Hagen on there. And now he's on 4 tokens on Amakua, which means that most of my ice is disabled. Like this drafter is disabled, the vanilla is disabled, and the Hagens only have 1 more token left. So if he can play some more expose effects, which he can with the falsified, he's getting assets with the Tranquility Home Grid. Now he's free to run anywhere. So he's running HQ. Raising this Hagen doesn't help. He knows that it's a Hagen from the exposure. So yeah, I just have to take this, give him the single access. In this case, he even finds the Rashida, which is really bad for me. But I know that next turn he can't do as much. He also has a turning wheel, so he actually finds his Vakeron from hand. So I'd say this HQ turning wheel was pretty good on point because since the game is in such a slow pace, knowing what the corp is holding on HQ is very valuable. And as in this case, you can see sometimes they just hold agendas. And Vakeron at turn, what are we on? 7 probably? Yeah, at turn 7 can be early enough for you to win the game just by the Vakeron ticking down. I'm using the Sportsmetal to draw into more cards because I need something to install in server 5. I find it. He's asking whether this is early enough to be good, and as I've said, this is probably enough, but like turn 7 is the point where a Vakeron can still be important. And now I'm doing what my entire game plan against 4-9 is if the Amakua hits the board, which is actually purging. Because these Hagens are really important. This Hagen on R&D, this Hagen on HQ, and the third Hagen that is in my deck still somewhere, are really important to aim for that Amakua to just find a way to trash it off the board and make them actually find the real breakers. And as you can see, the runner is now in a situation where they have to just draw cards and find solutions. He's just drawing, he's playing the deuces to look at the magnet that's on archives just to get some tokens on Amakua going. Actually running there, and now I'm in a position to be able to res that. And this does give him some window to run into HQ, but I know that even like I'm at 3 credits, firing a diversion just to take away 3 of my credits is not worth it. And he finds the best thing that he can do, which is just install Penny Shaver, get some value off of there, get some value off of the turning wheel, but in total not get enough for his money, in my opinion. And he even hits the Hyperloop extension, which means that this is some forward tempo for me. And as you can see, he's only on 1 credit. I'm sitting at a good 6 credits and a Tranquility Home Grid waiting for me to install stuff on it, so I think I'm doing pretty well here. So, red level clearance for some money, installing the Rashida on there, and once again paying the 4-9 tax because Amakua is on board. Actually installing the Spin Doctor because I know this can't give him a successful run. And taking a credit, I'm sitting at 8 credits. I have a Rashida on board. I'm sitting pretty well here because he needs at least 3 tokens on Amakua to be able to do archives runs for 1 credit to get more tokens, and I still have the option of purging. And if at some point I can install something else on archives, I'm pretty well set up. So he finds a Spin Doctor. I also, at this point, I should have also seen this earlier. I decided to res Rashida because I don't want to give him any options of firing falsified credentials. He's just taking money and slowly running out of options, I'd say. So at this point, my Rashida draws me into Luminal, which is an amazing agenda at this point because I can just fast advance it off of the Tranquility Home Grid and still have a turn to do stuff with. In this case, firing off a sprint, finding a Vitruvius, and that Vitruvius can just go into server 5 because Gatekeeper into Drafter with a runner on 5 credits and Amakua at 1 token is extremely safe for me. And since I've already paid the 1 credit to expose, I don't have to pay it here again. So I'm sitting at 8 credits and I'm sitting pretty well here, I'd say. So he's once again digging for solutions. This Rizeki is coming way too late in this game, so that doesn't help him. I can just score this Vitruvius off of the remote. And he's looking for more solutions. Just finds a Sure Gamble and decides to install the Black File. As I've said, this is the one threat that 4-9s have packed in this tournament to combat for the Sportsmetal list. But this is kind of the best case situation. You have already a Vakron on the table. There are still some points that you can steal, so the Black File actually does something. And as I've said in the chat, now the real game starts because there's a real option of me not having enough, not finding the agendas and just bleeding 2 points somewhere, be it 1 Vitruvius, be it 2 1-pointers. All of the Mega Priests are still in the deck. So I now have to really think about what I'm doing. And what I'm doing is just install a Spin Doctor here to be able to shuffle back non-agendas into R&D to keep it safe if he finds some way of getting into R&D and getting some valuable accesses. And I'm just playing the hedge fund, installing some more ice, getting everything safe, because I know with the Audacity in hand I can pretty much win this game whenever I need to. I just need to be safe enough for enough turns that this Black File doesn't get relevant. And as you can see, this Black File costs 5 credits, so this put the runner at 4 credits with a pretty bad situation for Amakua. He still needs his breakers, All of my servers are still protected by good eyes, so this kind of leaves the runner without any options. And these diversions are piling up in HQ without any real option of using them at any point in the game. So he does find a boomerang, which gives him some options to use diversions later on. But as I've said, like this game is the pressure that Sportsmetal has built up in the early to mid game was enough to just leave the runner without any chance to build the strong economic engine that keeps him going through the late game. And if you pressure the runner this hard enough in the early game, you'll end up in mid to late games where they are struggling to find some piece of the puzzle, be it money or be it breakers or be it both. As you can see, I'm just continuing to try to find solid ways to win this game, and in this case I'm deciding, since I'm not holding anything valuable in hand, just some ice and a biotic, deciding to score out this one more point. Now I am at 7 points, so I will win once this black file ticks down. And there are really only 4 agendas left in these 11 cards in R&D that can win the run of the game, and I can shuffle back some cards from R&D and draw some cards off of R&D, which just distributes the options for them to find more points in this game. So they opt to run R&D, actually letting me get a Drafter Fire here, which is pretty devastating because I've got the Spin Doctor in Archives as well. So this Drafter installs a Spin Doctor, Hagen gets boomeranged, and I'm trying to dilute R&D, actually failing to do so with the Spin Doctor because I'm just drawing into 2 knowledge ender cards. But shuffling back hedge funds, finding the Vakeron, which would also not matter. So pretty much these Spin Doctors did the worst possible thing that they did, that they could do. So they've actually in some increased the real agenda points in R&D. But still, with some luck, I managed to not bleed away 2 real agendas, and even the Sportsmetal draw drew me into 2 non-agendas. So the chances of him actually winning on this R&D access were pretty high. But once again, all of this is like a gamble, starting from all of these Spin Doctor reses, and they could have gone a lot differently. And now, since he doesn't have any better options, he runs HQ. And once again, if I had drawn agendas in R&D here, also there would also be some options for him to win. But since I only have a Vakeron in hand, I know that at this point I've won the game. And so next turn I just purge once and win the game. So yeah, that's pretty much what I'm often doing against Crims. Either doing this like huge glacier build up where I just make the Amakua look dumb by being able to purge and then have my ice be relevant, or just go fast enough and not care about giving away HQ access and then give away diversions and win that way. So yeah, that's pretty much what I've got to say about this. Thank you for listening if anybody did, and let me know if this is actually helpful for you. And maybe if I have similar ideas in the future, I might do another video or two. So yeah, thank you for listening.